Well, it looks like it's just about 1 o'clock. So be respectful of everyone's time. I guess we can go ahead and get started. Again, I'd like to welcome you all to the ARIS's Broader Impacts 101 webinar. We are very glad you're here, and thanks for adding your info in the chat box. It helps us to understand who we're talking to, so thank you very much for that. Just as a reminder, we'll mute you all until the end, where we'll hopefully have a nice Q&A session where you can ask some questions and talk a little bit more with us about broader impacts. We also encourage you to put your questions in the chat box as we go, and my colleagues will be trying to answer them as we go through the webinar today. So with that, I am going to get us started. Assuming my computer will cooperate. Here we go. So I just want to introduce you to our training team. I introduced myself. I'm here at Rutgers University. I'm in cooperative extension, working with the Department of Youth Development as a STEM agent. I've been here at Rutgers for about 25 years. I have a master's in oceanography, and I've been doing matchmaking, as I like to say it, between our researchers here in oceanography and more broadly in our School of Environment and Biological Sciences now for about 25 years. So I've had a lot of experience writing broader impact statements for a variety of proposals here at our school. Also on our team is Jory Weintraub, who is at Duke University, and he directs a broader impact resource center there. And also Megan Heitman, who's at Iowa State and who works with ARIS quite a bit in keeping our training efforts moving forward. So our task today is to kind of give you a little bit of an introduction to what broader impacts are, what makes a broader impact project excellent, how do I construct an awesome broader impact project, and give you again some time for some reflection and some questions, since there's so much expertise on the webinar today beyond our own here in the training team as I'm watching all the names pop up. So hopefully we'll have a nice conversation at the end. So let's get started. So what is the broader impact criterion? Let's just get started with that. And the way I'd like you to participate a little bit with us here is to tell us on a scale of 1 to 5 in the chat box how you or if your principal investigators feel about broader impacts. When they come and sit in your office and want to discuss what a broader impact should or could be, how do they feel about it? Do they feel it's an opportunity? And then you would give it a 5 on our scale, or do they feel like it's really a box checking activity, or that something they have to do? If that's the way the vast majority of your PIs feel, check a 3, or somewhere in between. 1 if it's a total burden, if they just come in dreading the whole process of looking at a broader impact. Let's see what we got here. Oh, kind of gotten some folks saying it's kind of on the lower end of the scale, more of a burden, more of a box checking. We got 1 person who's looking at it more as an opportunity, Tracy and Edward, so that's good. But and that's fairly typical. I myself get folks that come in from all different angles, looking at it as something they have to do versus something that they want to do, and looking at it as an opportunity. So I think we all experience that in our work. So let's talk about what NSF does with these 2 criterion. They have to have one called intellectual merit, which looks at the potential of the project to advance our knowledge and understanding within our field or across multiple fields, making it transdisciplinary. And they really look at to what extent a proposal can do this, what the level of creativity or originality is, and that's really focused on the research. The second criterion is broader impacts, and that really takes a look at the potential of the research to benefit society or advance some particular desired societal outcome. And that is the one we're going to be spending our time talking about today. So just to give you a sense of timeline here, NSF, in the NSF Act of 1950, was designed to promote the progress of science, to advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and to secure national defense. Back in 1950 is when NSF came to be. And as you can see from our timeline here, the broader impacts has really been a part of this process for a long time, going back to the 80s. In 1997, they simplified the criterion to the two that I just mentioned. In 2007, they further clarified that, really focusing and emphasizing the transformative research component. And then more recently, the National Science Board reiterated the importance of these two criterion. So they're pretty well ingrained in the NSF culture at this point. And of course, as you all know, our ARIS Center is really focused on creating resources that support this idea of broader impacts and advancing our impactive research on society. So, so that's exciting. Let's see. And just as a reminder of how the process works, this is hot on my mind as having just come back from an NSF panel review last week. PIs are really given about a month to review a proposal. And when you get into panel review, it's about 20 to 30 minutes on each proposal. Some are even triaged out of the process, especially if they don't meet both criterion, if there isn't a broader impact broadly labeled in the proposal. And then they spend about 20 to 30 minutes on each proposal, 10 of which might be on the broader impact component, depending on the panel and depending on the review process. And of course, our goal is to make it through all these levels of review between the panels and the program officers and the final decisions to have a successful proposal. So it is quite a rigorous process, and having just participated in one, it is very challenging to get that proposal through all those levels and make them what they call highly competitive. So here's what the landscape looks like. For 2019, I asked what the funding rates were. They can be very variable depending on the directorate. Anywhere between 21 and 27% is the average, but there are some directorates where it's even lower than that. NSF receives about 41,000 proposals annually, of which they award roughly 11,000. The decision time is a long period, right? You submit it, it's almost between 5 and 6 months before you can hear about a decision. And then the average award is almost 3 years roughly, and the annual yearly award is about 177,000 per year. And of course, these are very variable. I mentioned these just as averages to help give you a sense of where this all fits in, this broader impact component. And right now, we're going to be focused on NSF, not because they're the only agency that cares about it, but because the broader impact criterion is specific to them at this time. Other agencies do care about the broader impact of research. Some of them have requirements in their RFPs and some have less so. But again, our emphasis today is going to be really focused on NSF. So NSF doesn't provide a ton of guidance on what exactly you should include in terms of a broader impact statement in your proposal, but they do have these suggested theme areas or topic areas that they have in a lot of their documentation. And here are some of the topic areas for your consideration. They're kind of ranked in the order, my own personal order of how I see them as they come to me. That doesn't mean that they're ranked in any kind of priority order for the rest of the world, but for me, this is how I see them. The first one is the full participation of women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented minorities in STEM. And that's a very, very important topic area that I always encourage PIs to consider. Improving STEM education, educator development at any level is always a solid way to proceed. Increasing public scientific literacy and engagement with science and technology, and development of competitive STEM workforce is really, really important. And what it's important here to also note is that you really don't have to have your principal investigator focus on all of these. As a matter of fact, that would be a mistake. It's really best for them to highlight one or maybe two that work best for them and focus on their strengths. So this is not a laundry list activity where all of these things should be checked. Here's a few more that NSF covers in their guidance. Improving, they're a little bit more broad, if you will. They're improving the well-being of individuals and society, increasing partnerships between academia and industry, national security, competitiveness of the United States, and infrastructure enhancement are all also areas that can count as broader impacts. And one that I just want to emphasize again is the idea of broadening participation as a broader impact. That is very important right now to NSF. It is one of their 10 big ideas known as the Includes program, and is a really critical component to broadening participation and broadening impacts. And it really is, the goal here is really to discover and nurture talent wherever it can be found, and thinking that is transformative to the research that we do, to have a diverse and equitable treatment of the folks involved in the research and the way the research can impact a diverse and equitable group of people on both ends. So it is a very important consideration, and one that you should certainly discuss with your principal investigators for sure. Let's talk about why broader impacts matter a little bit. The first reason is because NSF says so, right? It is part of their criterion. And what's really behind that is this idea is that this research really needs to be relevant to the people who fund it, which is the taxpayers. And reaching out to and proactively discussing these research impacts are very, very important to those who fund it. And this is a nice picture of Franz Cordova, who is the director of the National Science Foundation. And also from the congressional side, you know, obviously Congress also feels that each application that's funded really has to be relevant to the national interest of US citizens. So accountability is really, really important, and one of the key goals here. Why does it matter to the principal investigator? Well, for the principal investigator, they really have to think about their own broader impact identity. Are they really going to look at this as just a box checking effort, or are they going to really look at it as an opportunity, as a way to advance their own legacy and their own impact of their research on society? So these are the different ways in which they can consider that, looking at how they personally, through their research, can increase diversity, how they can engage the next generation of scientists and engineers, and what kind of legacy their research can leave, whatever that might be, through their broader impacts work. And emphasizing that relevance again. So from both angles, it's really important, from the point of view of the PI and also from obviously the point of view of NSF. So where does it fit into a proposal? Well, the short answer is everywhere. There is a lot of opportunity to include the broader impact work. One of the key concerns I always hear from investigators that visit my office is, you know, I don't have room. I have to spend most of my time talking about the research. And the reality is that there are plenty of places to indicate your support of broader impacts. It's required in the project summary. There's a requirement to have a few lines about the intellectual merit and the broader impact, so that's a requirement. Will be returned without review if they don't have that. Certainly throughout the project description and in supplementary documents, through the mentoring plans, the data management plan, definitely through the letters of collaboration, where you can show your partnerships and show off the good connections that you've made for your broader impacts. Certainly within the biosketch of the people that you choose to participate and the work that they've done and the significant work that they highlight in their biosketch. And definitely in the budget and the budget justification. We'll come back to the importance of that. But the key here is that the PAG-G, as they call it, has reference to the broader impact and guidance for that throughout the guidance document, the PAC-G, as you see pictured here. And in a nutshell, really, if you talk to NSF program officers, they'll tell you that the best broader impacts are really ones that are seamlessly integrated into the research, that where there are strong connections and strong partnerships and clear pathways to see how that broader impact can play out in the research. And of course, that's where the devils are in the detail, right? In terms of figuring out how to make that shine through the proposal. So let's talk about that. How do we make that broader impact really shine in the proposal? What makes an excellent broader impact project? Well, a couple things. There are some examples out there of others who have done it successfully, who you can see some of their work on this website here that you see on the left. COSI Now is one that I ran our NSF Center for about 10 years. COSI stands for Centers for Ocean Science Education Excellence. And we focused on the collaborations between educators and scientists and their broader impact work. So some of our key success stories are documented here in a little audio piece, as well as a written up case study on their work and what they found through their broader impacts work. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Georgia Tech also has a nice sample broader impact statements website that can also be really helpful. So it can be really helpful to look at what others have done to kind of see where the benchmarks are for what good and excellent and very good look like, right? But one of the things that we like to do is highlight one of our favorite broader impact projects, which comes to us from Dr. Nalini Nakarni. She's at the University of Utah, and she really embodies what a strong broader impact project can look like. She is an ecologist, and she does a lot of work with a minimum security or maximum security prisoners, I think both, looking at how she can grow moss in artificial conditions. And I guess it first came to her to work on this because she thought that the prison population might have the time and space to participate in a citizen science-like effort. And more importantly, it would give them contact with living plants, because she felt that the worst part possible of living in incarceration would be the lack of contact with nature. So she was really looking to take this idea and this ability for them to work with living plants and improving their lives, while also giving her access to people who might be able to help her collect data and help her figure out how to grow these moss plants effectively. So she became so successful with this that the inmates took on experiments, and one inmate even co-authored an article that was later published in a scientific journal. So they really did become involved as equal partners. And I encourage you, as I chat more about Nalini, in the text box, just to jot down what you think is great about this, what's jumping out at you as why we might be considering this an excellent broader impact. Feel free to chat and play along with us. So a little bit more about Nalini and her work. The prison staff were also really receptive to the project in general, and that mushroomed into a series of other activities that included organic gardening, biodiesel, recycling, beekeeping, and composting, a whole variety of things. So the sense of sustainability really permeated through the prison. And now every one of those topics has been incorporated into how the Washington State Penitentiary operates, which is really sustainable and really amazing, and to her credit. So their conversations at the prisons really changed from how long their sentences were and who put them inside, and really turned more into what vegetables they were harvesting, or which of the chills will affect the plants and which ones can tolerate the best temperatures and things of that sort. And then she really, Nalini herself really counts this as a redemptive kind of exercise. She even got involved with the most constrained prisoners of the inmate population, and those that are in solitary confinement. which are only let out of their little tiny cells for an hour a day. And she created this natural imagery in prisons project where they could go into a small room and be able to see images of nature, even though they were not able to be outside. So there was a lot of work being done here for a very underserved population. And as I said, I think Nalini herself will tell you that she feels just as enriched by doing this broader impact work as she does with the research that she's doing. And that's really that idea of identity, broader impact identity again. So, so what makes this so great? I see that a few of you have added some things in the chat box, which I appreciate. And there's this great list of things that we've come up with when we think about Nalini's work that really help to underpin what an effective broader impact could have. It's serving this extremely underserved population is probably the first thing that jumps to mind, right? And having both the educational and research impacts kind of so seamlessly integrated is also really, really interesting. The idea of the positive sustainability impacts on the prison system itself is really, really exciting. The humanitarian components, the ability of her to have them participate in journal writing and in this idea of getting them involved in the citizen science kind of components of this. The ability for her to leverage additional research, additional resources beyond what NSF provides is really exciting. And really giving her graduate students and her postdocs the opportunity to explore how to translate the research to this particular population is also very exciting. So Nalini is a home run hitter in this regard. When we think about her broader impact work, she really does embody some of those amazing things that we all like to see in a true broader impact project. Not every project, I'll say this, not every PI or principal investigator is going to be a rock star to the level that Nalini is, but we highlight her as a sort of high bar here for how broader impacts could be viewed by a scientist or by a researcher. So how do we create an effective broader impact project? So that's what I want to step through now for you. The good news is that the National Alliance for Broader Impacts has created this wonderful resource guide called the Guiding Principles and Questions that you can download from the ARIS website. And it has some fantastic information in it to really support how to develop a strong broader impact project. And there's also my effort here to work with the COSI Center again, developed this, what we call, for a lack of a better name, our Broader Impact Wizard. It's a software tool that we've designed to help step a principal investigator through the development of their broader impact. And as part of ARIS, we're developing a 2.0 version, which is really exciting, taking some of the good elements of this one and creating a new version. So here are the components that I always like to hit on when a principal investigator visits my office. I try to get them to key into these 5 things to help them think through how their broader impact could be developed. And the wizard itself actually walks you through these 5 steps as well to help kind of flesh out these ideas and thinking about what's possible. So I'm gonna, basically it's the audience, the activity selection, a budget, an evaluation, and then developing partners and identification of your project description. So let's walk through those one by one. So the audience selection is really important, figuring out who you want to work with, why it's important to work with them, and what the depth of your potential impact could be with that audience. So we look at the size of the audience. Do you want to go large scale public audience where you may have a slightly less or more shallow depth of engagement? Or do you want to go with a smaller population of folks such as Nalini's prison population and go in deeper, right? Take a deeper dive into kind of the kinds of interactions that you want to have with them. These are important considerations that should be talked about and discussed in the broader impact. And just to kind of relate it to the to the NABI guidelines, the NABI guidelines suggest that one of the key questions a reviewer should ask is, what is the potential for the proposed activity to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes? This is a really, really important question that every PI should consider as they're drafting their broader impact, and that certainly relates back to audience. The next kind of key component to consider is the activity selection. What kinds of partners have been identified? Can you cite the educational literature? Can you correlate it to your budget? Many of the principal investigators that visit me don't even realize sometimes that there is educational literature, that they don't have to invent a wheel, that there are lots of learning scientists out there who know a lot about how people learn and can help us kind of frame how best to design their project. And that's really helpful and important to note. In the NABI guidelines, one of the key questions raised is this plan for carrying out the proposed activity well-reasoned, well-organized, and based on a sound rationale? That's really a key question that really speaks to the activity, the types of activities you're selecting to highlight as part of your broader impact. The next one is partners. It's really, really important to develop a successful team that can execute the broader impact work. Really, the PI shouldn't be expected to be all things and have expertise in all things. So it really is important to have them bring in expertise that can help execute the plan that they want to put into place. And the NABI guidelines question that sort of marries to that is, how well qualified is the individual, the team, or institution to conduct the proposed activities? So bringing in that team is really, really critical in terms of having a successful broader impact project. The next thing to consider is the resources and the budget. The institutional infrastructure that is available. How much is your university can and will support the activity that you've proposed? How much resources are available already in kind? And then how many resources will you need to actually carry out the work? A rule of thumb that I often give our PIs that visit my office is they should think about having a budget, first of all, for broader impacts. It is not a free item. Always try to underscore that, and often try to encourage them to think about it in the broadest terms of about 10% of their total budget. And that sometimes can be problematic, and sometimes not so. Sometimes it's more than that. It really depends on the PI, the type of work they're doing, and obviously what they're proposing. So this is probably the most diverse kind of point to consider when developing a broader impact, because it's going to be different for every principal investigator. And then the question that you sort of respond to for this bullet is, are there adequate resources available to the PI, either at home or through collaborations to carry out the proposed activities? Is the budget allocated for broader impact activities sufficient to successfully implement them? And very, very important that that appears in some way in the proposal, whether it's in the budget justification or in some other section, that there is some inclination that the PI can carry out this work effectively based on the resources that they have. Very important. And then the last one is to consider is the evaluation. The evaluation is really looking at, how will I know I've been successful? Can I measure these outcomes? And do I have a method for measuring that impact? And the NABI guidelines suggest the same thing. Does a plan incorporate a mechanism to assess success? And this can often be one of the more challenging aspects of writing a broader impact. Years ago, NSF used to recommend external evaluators. Now they've backed off of that a fair amount and are just saying really now that there should be a way to figure out whether you've been successful or not. and having an evaluation plan of some sort, whether it's internally done or externally done, is up to the PI. But more and more these days, we're here at Rutgers, we're doing more of an internal view where we find someone in our graduate school of ed, or sometimes schools have particular centers that look at teaching effectiveness that can be really helpful in designing some evaluation questions or surveys or metrics to help with this particular task of the broader impact work. And then finally is looking at developing that project description. And one of the things that, that I like to do is think about having the PIs think about SMART objectives. And that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, just to kind of keep everything in check in terms of what they've developed to make it as realistic as possible and as achievable as possible, I guess, is really, really important. And although I've presented all these steps in a kind of a linear way, I just want to emphasize that a lot of times they develop in a very non-linear way. The PIs can really popcorn around these 5 different areas and develop them as they go, but they are 5 really important components of what a strong, broader impact should have in them in terms of its elements. And again, the NABI guidelines are really asking the question, to what extent do the proposed activities suggest, explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts? And this one is really, really important to NSF. Obviously, they're trying to fund as many creative and transformative research projects as they can. And I think this extends to the broader impact work as well. You have to walk that fine line of tapping into existing resources and existing programs and add just enough character and creativity to make it innovative and transformative. And this is really probably one of the most difficult things about writing good broader impacts, is walking that line, right? Coming back to the wizard, to encourage you to take a look at that. If a PI logs into that and creates an account, they can actually be walked through all of these different components that I just mentioned and save their ideas and their notes, and it will provide a printout when they've completed all the steps. Probably the most attractive component of this printout is it will automatically, depending on the audiences and the activities that you select, will give you a literature review of potential articles that and journal articles that might be relevant to cite or read as part of developing this broader impact work. And the PIs I work with really enjoy this component of the wizard, and with our 2.0 version, we're looking to update and expand this particular component because it does it is so well received by PIs. So in summary, just again, in terms of how NSF views broader impacts, what they're really looking for is a broader impact section that is clearly described, has a well-justified rationale, which again could include that literature review that I just mentioned, that demonstrates some level of creativity or originality, and has a basis for the approach that's described. The proposal should have clearly stated goals and really be very clear about the qualifications of those responsible and the resources that are available to support the effort. And then, of course, as we talked about, we should really have a documented ability to assess the results and have some sort of a way to evaluate the work. So this is what NSF in a nutshell is asking for. And it's what the wizard tries to address in walking PIs through in a careful way. Okay, so just a couple of reminders and a few last minute tips before we open it up to questions, because we want to make sure we have enough time for that. I want to just have everybody remember that the research itself can be broader impacts. We get asked that quite a bit by some PIs. Sometimes those two things are the same, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes your broader impacts can be directly related to your research, or it can be really foundational. I'll give you an example. I'm working on a proposal right now for NASA, actually, that's focused on life on other planets, and it's a very, very complicated science that I think is, in and of itself, the science itself is very difficult to translate to public audiences. So we're doing a lot of effort right now to work on some more of the simple or foundational elements of what life on other planets could look like. Not to the specific degree of what the proposal is addressing, but on a much more foundational level, kind of scaling it back 3 or 4 notches. And oftentimes you have to do that because some of the research that you'll come across in a research application is so specific that you kind of have to take it up 2 or 3 levels to make it relevant to a broader audience, and that's okay to do. And it can be very foundational or very, very much relatable to the research. It really, again, depends on the PI, and it can be really important to consider as you're writing your broader impact statements. So a couple more tips for you before we open it up for questions. So the wizard asks these crucial steps. Another way to ask these crucial questions would be, what does your PI want to do at the end of the day? What really makes them interested in doing broader impact work? Why do you want to do it? How are you going to do it? What resources do you need? Who will do it? Who will help you, right? Always want to encourage them not to go it alone. It's really a team sport doing broader impact work. And then again, very importantly, how will you know you've done it well? And getting them to look at these suggested areas of BI is really, really important, particularly the diversity piece that we talked about earlier. Broadening participation is very, very important. But having these opportunities to look at these areas that NSF has highlighted, I think, is always an important consideration in developing your broader impact. Encourage your PIs to just find the right fit for them. There is a one size fits all to this. It really does vary from PI to PI. And some of the most creative ones really take this into account, right? What's going to make them excited as a person and help them build, like we said earlier, their broader impact identity. This one is super important, finding the right partner. And this is the subject of a new unit that our training team is putting together, focused on partnerships. And finding the right partner to do this work is critical. Again, you want your PIs to know that they should never go it alone, that it is definitely something to find expertise and support their work with. Try to get the PIs to be as programmatic as possible. We don't want them to put in a laundry list of everything that they can think of or that they've ever done related to the broader impact they're proposing. Those never review well, and you want them to be really thoughtful and programmatic about what they're proposing. This is it really shows up in the panel review process from the bulleted list option, and that really never reviews well at all. Make sure that they budget time and money for their broader impacts. The time in particular, having been doing this now for 25 years, I can say that the ones that show up in my office 48 hours before it's due or 1 day before it's due is just never a good idea. Those never turn out well. They never review well. So having them think about this carefully and put the same effort into developing their broader impact as they do with their intellectual merit is really important. Getting them to see the crossover and integration of those two things is critical. And also budgeting money for it. I've seen over the years many situations where there's a lovely broader impact described but no budget for it, and reviewers will will see that and call them out on that in many ways. So it's really important to have the funding behind the plan. Otherwise, it doesn't seem realistic or doable unless there is some money in place to make it happen. And then, as we talked about, make sure there's an evaluation plan. Being able to say how and why you were successful is really critical. And this goes into those annual reports to NSF and really becomes a critical aspect of looking at what your future funding potential could look like. So in summary, what we would love is for you as a broader impact professional to think about how you can facilitate new and creative ways to couple basic research with broader impacts, how you can leverage your university resources or professional societies to increase the impact of the work, the broader impact work, and how we can align broader impacts with our university's strategic goals and allow the broader impact work to have greater and more sustained impact. These are things that I'm thinking a lot about when I develop new broader impacts, especially of how those all can dovetail together to facilitate leverage and align with what's being done. And this avoids kind of the one-offs, right? The really great things that don't have any funding sustainability. So I offer that as kind of what I have hanging on my wall right now to help me think about what's important in terms of being sustainable. So that's in a nutshell what I had for you. I encourage you to write in the chat box. I would love to hear what's one thing that we've said to you today that really resonated with you, that you're going to take away from this presentation in your own work. I would love for you to take our survey. The feedback we get from you is so important as we develop new resources and new professional development opportunities. It's really, really key that we get your feedback. So please take a moment to fill out this little short survey. It doesn't take more than 3 minutes to complete. And then lastly, I encourage you to email me with any ideas you have for professional development or any questions you have about professional development. Our training team would love to hear from you. And as we develop new modules, we're always looking for new insight as to what would be useful to you. So please take a moment to fill out that survey or email me any thoughts you have on that. And with that, I want to open it up to questions. I know Jory and Megan have been busily answering some questions in the chat box, but I want to make sure we have a moment to talk openly if we want to. Jory or Megan, is there anything you'd like to highlight to get us started?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you've covered everything pretty well. There's, I've been trying to answer questions as they've been coming in. But encourage people to submit additional questions if they have them. Just want to reiterate, if you haven't seen in the chat room, we are recording this webinar, and I'm going to paste the link in here. As soon as we get a chance to edit it, we will post it on the ARIS YouTube site, and it can be accessible to anybody who wants it. And I will send something out to the ARIS Navi listserv notifying everybody when it's been posted.
Yes, I see one question. Someone asked, and they sent, I think it sent it to me privately, how do we access the BI wizard? So right now, it is on the COSI website. It'll soon be in some form migrating over to the ARIS website. But for right now, I'll put the URL in the chat box. And you can check out the 1.0 version. The 2.0 version, as I said, will be coming somewhat soon, I hope. We're working on a variety of different updates to the videos in particular. And one thing I'll just highlight while we have a few moments is there is one 7-minute video that ARIS just redid as part of our 2.0 version. And it is a wonderful tool to send to a principal investigator before they show up in your office to kind of give them the lay of the land of what broader impacts is and what are some of the things they should be considering. And then when they actually come for a meeting with you, they already have sort of a grounding in the things that we talked about in this webinar today. So, so I encourage you to use that video, if nothing else. If you don't have them go through the wizard in its totality, at least have them take a look at that first introductory video that really, I think, encapsulates all of the things we just talked about in a very succinct way.
Another thing I would mention quickly while we're waiting for more questions to come in is that we will be continuing to do these webinars, probably something like once a month, and we are definitely interested in hearing from all of you on topics you'd like us to cover. So if you have ideas, you can reach us. Janice's email address is right there on the screen. You can also reach us through the ARIS website, and let us know what webinar topics you'd like us to cover. And additionally, if you're interested in more extensive training, we do institutional visits where we will come out to your institution for a half-day, full-day workshop, things like that, multi-day workshops even. So a lot more information on all that on the ARIS website.
Yeah, I see Carrie said a faculty-focused webinar would be great. That's a good idea, and certainly one we've kind of talked about is developing, you know, changing the language of this a little bit from us as BI professionals to more of a, you know, focused in on the early career researchers themselves in particular.
This is Carrie. Do you hear me?
I have,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think it could be if you developed that, and I'm sure you probably, I went to Jory's talk he did here at UC Merced, and it was faculty focused.
Mm-hmm.
It could be nice that those of us who are in this domain, you know, we could share with all of our people, and in that way really maximize all the folks who are learning about the best practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that would be wonderful.
Sure, but do look at that little introductory video, because in many ways that has some of the key components we're talking about from
Okay.
the wizard. Yeah.
So we can
check
share that too.
Yeah, check that out. Yeah.
So Monica posted a question, which I'll read it aloud. As an outside nonprofit that does public science outreach, we would love to partner with PIs on their broader impacts. But when a university takes 50+% off the top for overhead and NSF provides less than requested, how should we budget for our work? Do we pad the proposed budget because we won't get enough to actually cover our costs? Janice, I'm going to punt that one to you. What do you think?
Yeah, Monica raises a good point. The budgeting is always a difficult thing, and you're right. I mean, at Rutgers here, they take 56% off the top, and it's that's a lot, right? So the ways that I do it is I always try to include some kind of time, buying some time of a member of my staff. I have 3 people, actually 4 people now that work on our education and community engagement team. And I always get them to try to buy out a little bit of their time. It can be as little as 2 weeks even, just something to contribute to the personnel time that it takes to do this work. If they're opting into something we've already got going and they're adding, you know, their own component to it. For example, right now we have a lot going on with teaching with data. So we have PIs that want to come in and contribute a data set and have us work with them to develop a learning opportunity either for community college or high school or whatever it might be that focuses on data literacy. And, you know, so for that, there's got to be a component of you know, having that budgeted personnel time. Everything else, like you said, can be padded in other ways, you know, through other line items or other existing resource budgets. But for me, in education, because again, most of my broader impacts are in education and community engagement, that personnel cost is just non-negotiable. If we don't have the people to do it, we can't do it. But there's a lot of leveraging opportunities too. Sometimes I leverage with our local geology museum to help with the staffing costs and things that they're already doing. So it really is a dance, and I understand your concern about how little money at the end of the day there is for the broader impacts work. But I think you have to ask for something in order to make it relevant.
Yeah, I'll just add in that actually quite a few people who come to me for help with their broader impacts, especially newer faculty or grad students or postdocs who haven't written a lot of grants or done a lot of outreach yet, are often surprised to even realize that you have to ask for any money to cover the time and effort of like informal science ed partners, people at museums and things like that. And I think it never occurred to them. There's almost a perception that the folks at informal science institutions are just sort of sitting around and waiting for PIs to come to them and partner with them. So definitely, you should have these conversations well before you submit the proposal and have letters of support from the partners that you're going to partner with, and the budget should include whatever is agreed upon as a reasonable amount to compensate the informal science ed folks for their time and effort to be involved in that. As a side project, I'm involved in something where I'm working with a couple local museums here in Durham, and they're sort of developing almost a menu of, if you want to do this activity with us, here's how much you should put into your budget. If you want to do this activity, here's how much you should put in your budget. And I think that really helps with PIs who are trying to figure out how much to budget. So if you're at an informal science ed institution, maybe consider having something like that in place if you don't already.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion. I see a note here from Nancy asking about discipline-specific webinars. I don't know if she can unmute and tell us a little bit more about what she means by that. I would love to hear more about that. Or write it in the chat box if you can't get the microphones to work.
Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
Sit down.
Yep, we can hear you.
All right. My thought was I have gone to our College of Engineering and presented, not DI specifically, but for example, career proposal development to them, and realized how different that is when I talk to folks in biology or education. So if the topic could be slightly tailored to make sense for thinking engineers in particular, where there seems to be sometimes more hurdles there, or for example mathematics or physics, things that are maybe harder to translate into a BI project for them. They may relate really well to the subset webinar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that you're definitely correct in saying that each discipline handles things really differently, and their funding rates are really different, right? So yeah, you do have to kind of tailor your advice based on the type of PI you're talking to. Even something like the career proposals are handled very differently in each of the directorates. Like here in oceanography, which I'm most familiar with, career proposals are extremely hard to get. They're very competitive, and the PIs really have to go all out. There's some very specific criteria that that they have to hoops they have to jump through. Whereas in engineering, I think I've heard that it's more an expected strong scientists get their career proposals funded a little differently. So I do think there's a lot of directorate specific information here that you need to kind of convey to the group that you're speaking with. And as a community, compiling that advice for each discipline would be useful. I don't pretend to be an expert in all of the different disciplines. There are certain directorates that I have more experience with than others, and I'm sure Jory and Megan, you would feel the same about the ones you're more familiar with, right?
Yeah, and in fact, the three of us, the training team, were just having a conversation about an hour and a half ago about how we're getting requests for people to do, from people to do workshops focused on social sciences. And none of us really come from a social science background, but it's a request we get reasonably often. And so we were talking about strategies for trying to partner with some social scientists to be able to do more social science specific workshops. So this is something that we're going to work towards as a future goal of ours.
Yep.
There was a question, Janice, about is there a cost for the using the BI wizard?
No.
I responded that there's not, but do you have anything else you want to add about that?
No, there isn't at this time. Like I said, we'll be busily updating it. It was developed a number of years ago, so right now the literature really needs to be updated, and we're trying to switch it so that it feels less linear, that there's more of a an interdisciplinary flow to it in terms of which section you fill out first. So technologically, that's a little bit more challenging, but that's where we'd really like to go with it. So there's no cost at this time. Any other questions?
I just had one with regards to, like, I'm trying to do like a technical proposal of sorts, and how are the aspect of undergraduate research? Is that a good, you know, like BI, for example?
Undergraduate.
So I would like to hire some students to help me with my research, and how does that sound as something for your broader impact?
I think it all depends on how you frame it. We joke around here a lot that in the early days, the key broader impacts we saw were we're going to build a website and hire a student. I think as long as you steer clear of, you know, the kind of basic, you know, sort of broad brush view of that, if you get into specifics on how, you know, how you're going to do it is really important. To what end? What are your goals? Again, going back to those SMART objectives are really important. What are you trying to achieve? And then I think you can make a good case for it depending on that.
So, for example, if I was trying to like get in some like research experience that would carry over as a graduate into whatever field they were going to do next, and I framed that work in a way that undergraduates can actually basically you know, have some money to not only do research, but as a result of the position, have some money to support themselves while they're actually doing it over, let's say, over a summer or something.
Yeah,
does that actually fit into the BI proposition here?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Janice.
No, go ahead, Jory.
What I was going to say is, I think you need to try to keep in mind the areas that Janice outlined in her presentation that the NSF considers to be strategic areas that they're targeting. So if you simply said, for example, I'm looking for money to support undergraduate research, then that might be deemed as sort of not specific or not ambitious enough. But if you align that by saying, I'm going to specifically go to minority science outreach conferences like the Softness Conference.
Yeah, I should have been clear about that. I'm actually trying to do a electronic communication sort of project. And that I can do by myself with a colleague or something. But I'm thinking of bringing in some students so at the same time I can enhance their research learning sort of goals, you know. And I realize that undergraduate research has a lot of other things that you have to consider, is like, you know, you have to create bite-sized chunks and you know, if I frame that all properly, you think that's a possible one, BI, right?
Yeah, and also keep in mind, NSF has a number of solicitations that focused entirely on what you're talking about. The REU programs, there's many different, the IGE for graduate students. There's a number of different solicitations that focus specifically on these kinds of things. So yeah, certainly it can be a broader impact, or it can be a full-on thing at your university with its own funding. So
all right, thank you.
One thing we generally don't do is sort of address specific questions about specific proposals, because if we answered everyone, it would be sort of a challenge to do that. But in general, I would say, you know, keep focused on those key areas that the NSF outlines and try to address those areas. Another one might be, you know, one of the areas is workforce development. So if you can make the argument that you're training these students so that they will be particularly well prepared to go into the high-tech industry or whatever, you know, something like that. Align it with the criteria that the NSF has set out, and it will be, I think, more competitively that way.
Now, if a proposal is not specifically designed for a REU type of you know, solicitation, we could still use the same undergraduate research as a motivation for that, you know, for the BI stuff.
Yeah, I didn't quite follow that, but Megan's nodding
Okay,
her
so
head.
there are NSF has some requests for proposals out there that involve undergraduate research. Okay, and its sole purpose is to enhance undergraduate research. The one I'm thinking about is not, but as a broader impact, could that be something that not only justifies hiring students, but also justifies the BI aspects of it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep, I think so.
And in fact, if you have like RU sites on campus that are relevant to what you're doing that you can work with for some of the training for the undergraduate students for their research, that's another way to really bulk up your idea of supporting those students in their research area, and also leveraging NSF funds with NSF funds.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for coming today and talking with us about broader impacts. And I look forward to meeting you all again. Thanks for joining us. And as Dory said, this will be posted on our YouTube site at some point.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.